In today's episode, I speak to Darrell Williams on what you are going to do, who you are going to follow, and who you are going to be. That the decisions that you make today are going to affect your tomorrow. We discuss what HR looks for in the US military officer and what's the dominant leadership style. Darrell's answer is surprising. We also talk about the fact that leaders are role models all the time. Amongst a number of other things, we discuss the need to compete, to grow, and not to destroy. We talk about leadership being about helping people in their weakest moment, and what do you do with those career critical moments. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Darrell Williams. Hi, Darrell.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks, and I'm excited to have you on. I just can't wait to see what we're going to come up with.
Looking forward to it.
Before we start, tell the audience who you are.
So, my name is Darrell Williams. I grew up in the United States called Compton, California. Not too familiar people know Compton, but there's a movie in the United States called Boys in the Hood.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the environment that I grew up in and the timeline. And then there's another movie came out called Straight Outta Compton. And that's the environment that my brothers and sisters grew up in. So definitely grew up in a situation that was maybe not as ideal as most, but it definitely helped build my character, my mental toughness.
Yeah. So what did you take from that? Because I can imagine it's character building, but what did that build in your character?
For me, one thing it taught me was you have to make a decision very quickly on what are you going to do, who are you going to follow, and what are you going to be? Because there's the normal peer pressure, and then like I tell people, then there's that inner city Compton peer pressure where, you know, everybody wants you to join a gang, everybody wants you to sell drugs. Right? Everybody wants you to get involved with a lot of promiscuous things that could hinder your career down the road, and you don't realize it unless you have a wise mentor, a teacher, or parent, or guardian that says, hey, the decisions you make today will affect your tomorrow. So for me, it just taught me that I needed to stand by my values that my parents put inside of me early on and hold true to those convictions, knowing that down the road it's going to pay off.
So it was your parents that were your mentors in that?
Definitely were my first mentors, definitely.
See, I think that the leadership starts when you're young. And,
absolutely.
You know, real maverick leaders start leading when they're young, whether that's younger siblings or whatever. It's that leadership starts when they're young. And the ability to make decisions that are far-reaching when you don't have all the answers is a difficult skill. It appears to be a difficult skill for a lot of people. What made you make that decision when you're young?
I think for me, it was just you seeing what's around you and you realize, again, do you want to be a part of that? Or do you want to be the exception to that? And for me, I just wanted to be the exception. You know, I didn't know at that time I was going to join the military, but I just wanted to make sure that I kept myself in a position where if an opportunity presented itself, I would at least be qualified, right? I wouldn't take myself out of the game, as I used to tell a lot of young people when I speak at the schools. Because sometimes you take yourself out the game early, and it's not that you can't recover. It just you put in so much effort on trying to fix something where you could use that same effort to add to something.
Were you one of those kids where people followed you so that you would, I don't know, you want to play baseball, everybody would make you captain and you did that? And were you one of those kind of kids?
So the key is I was not.
Oh, interesting.
I was the kid that was quiet and observing, but I would build the coalition. So I was a kid where the captain, everybody followed to play baseball, right, or softball or football. And then there were arguments, right, on what was right and what was wrong. So I was the guy they would come to and say, okay, Darrell's going to tell us the truth. Darrell, was that a strike or was that not a strike?
Interesting, because that is definitely probably, I don't know, would you define yourself as a maverick? Because I define maverick as willfully independent people. Is that you?
I would say I am. And because of, again, that mental toughness growing up in Compton, my military career, working at the White House Communications Agency, and then just so happened with this podcast, yesterday I received an award from the White House Communications Agency. I was inducted into their Hall of Fame.
Wow.
So I would say those types of individuals are definitely those of a maverick background.
Cool. Well, we're going to have a quick look at the Hall of Fame in a second, but before we get there, the reason I started that conversation, because I was thinking that for effective maverick leaders, truth is the most important mainstay, and so much so that even if an omission makes it appear one way and it's not that way, you would have to admit that there's a misunderstanding. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so people assume something and it's in your favor, but it's not actually true. You still have to kind of fess up because it's not the truth otherwise.
Absolutely. Every great leader that I've modeled myself off of definitely carried the character of integrity.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm assuming then this integrity is what got you into the Hall of Fame for the in the White House Communication Agency.
It was definitely one of the factors, that is for sure. Again, my time in the military was awesome because that's where I was truly exposed to so many different types of leadership style, different types of leaders, right? Mm-hmm. Those that were loud, those who were quiet. I really found the quiet leaders, the people that were behind the scenes, never wanted the fanfare, but yet they were always there to help you and support you and mentor you. I just thought that was a great role to play because those are the people that you don't even realize they're in your corner until somebody says, hey, you need to go talk to Judith. I think she's been down that path before and she has a lot of wisdom. You're like, Judith, she doesn't even talk, right? You sure? And then you go talk to that person and you find all these pearls of wisdom. And then you find out they're just waiting to share those with someone that's serious about their leadership journey.
Yeah, it's true. Because there's nothing worse than somebody asking for advice that don't take it. Not that they don't take it because they listen to it and it makes no sense to them, but they're not looking for advice. They're just looking for a sounding off or confirmation of what they're doing is the right thing.
That is true. That is so true, Judith. That's why when I talk to a lot of individuals, one of the first questions I ask them is, what's the purpose? What do you want to get out of this conversation?
We must be related. That is so mean. Like, why are you asking? What is it that you want to do with it? So tell me, so you was in the White House comms agency in the Clinton-Bush era.
Correct.
What happens there? And presumably, were you in HR at that point? What was your role?
So what happens with the White House Communications Agency, everybody is recruited there based on their military background. Uh-huh. But what's so great about the organization is you have two roles. You have your primary in-town role, right, when you're not traveling, and then it's whatever you have. So for me, I was military HR, so I did the HR for a lot of the military people in one of the organizations within WACA. And then you have a travel role where if you were a satellite person, if you were a radio person, right? A switchboard. You perform that role on the road to duplicate the services and support that the president, vice president, Secret Service, and staff come to use on a regular basis. So when I was on the road, my HR background was more similar to a leader taking care of things. So I was used to being kind of like, I don't know if you have the term first sergeant in the military. I was like a first sergeant on the road.
So I don't know if you can answer the question, actually. I was just going to say, did you see a big difference between the two Bushes and Clinton in terms of their leadership?
Yes, every president has a different leadership style and leadership role. But the good thing about what we did is our focus was to support the office.
Right.
So it was almost like a marriage, right? You don't worry about the other person. All you do is worry about how do you develop your own skills? How do you make that next trip better? How do you make that team around you better? And that's really all you focus on. And everything else after that, it's kind of like a blur because it's not that important.
So truth in that role must have been all important.
Oh, absolutely. Because you're talking about setting up thousands of pieces of equipment all over the world, right? Trying to support this mission that if you make a mistake, everybody in the world knows you made a mistake, right? So high pressure job, working with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different people, right? We have people on the road that you may have someone that's, like a Judith that's been there for a number of years. Then you have a new person that's there, could be their first trip. And I always tell people, it was almost like a game, right? How do you take all these leadership pieces from everyone and complete this puzzle to make this mission a success? And you only have a short period of time to figure out what's Judith's strength, what's Darrell's strength. Yes, they bring a certain expertise to the table, but now how do I get that expertise to be maximized to support this visit to Normandy to celebrate the 50th anniversary of D-Day?
Brilliant. So being HR in the military, I'm really curious to know what HR looks for in a military officer. Because on the podcast, I've had a number of people from the US or the UK military, the various different services, but not someone from the perspective of hiring that individual. So I guess my question is, what do you look for? Is there like a generic template for a military officer, and is there a style of leadership that the US military in your time prefer to recruit for?
No, they don't. And that's one thing I loved about our military. Like for me, I was a senior enlisted member when in the military. However, what's so great about it is it didn't matter what your background was. It didn't matter what you thought you knew. I love the military because it breaks you down, right? And then it builds you back up. But when it builds you back up with a purpose and a sense of, I'm not just here for myself, I'm here for something greater. So as you start going through the training, everybody gets the same training. Everybody goes through the same types of opportunities. So it's not a matter of what you're looking for, but it's a matter of who's willing to be poured into to maximize their gift.
So that's interesting, because I always assumed that a military officer had to fit a template. But then all the people who have come to the military I've spoken to on this podcast have said that there's no such thing as command and control in the military now.
They say there's no command and control?
Yeah, so the style of management that says, you do this because I say so, they're saying that they're expected to think for themselves and lead, not just follow orders.
So I guess everybody's roles are different. One thing I liked in our agency was it was a combination of a lot of great tools and techniques, and it was whichever one fit your bag, then that's the one you use, as long as you accomplish the common goal or the common mission. So like for me, my leadership style when I used to travel Everybody was doing their role, but then I would always set aside time for training. I found that when you do training, it's one of the great equalizers in being successful. It puts everybody on a certain playing field, because someone may be a little bit more experienced. Somebody, like I said, this may be their first trip. But then if I take an experienced person like a Judith and say, hey, tomorrow afternoon for about 30 minutes, we're going to do some training on the new satellite system. Now Judith gets to bring her expertise, train everybody on it. Then we all ask different questions. And then from a different role, I could say, okay, Judith, what is it in my role as a first sergeant on the roll that you need me to do to ensure that you can set up that satellite? And then the radio person asks, what is it that I need to know? So when I'm looking for different things to make sure that my radio system connects with your satellite. So again, the leadership piece comes in a lot of different ways, but it's a matter of connecting all of our strengths, again, for that common success.
Yes, and that's interesting. So if we started off by saying leadership begins with the self, how does someone learn to lead themselves well?
I think there's a lot of different ways that you can lead yourself well, but to me, one of the best ways I've found is modeling, right? When you find someone that's doing what you want to do, right? I don't care if it's a marriage, a business, and personal, like what is that person doing? And then not what they're doing now, but how did they get there? That's one good thing I loved about the military, because it always allowed you to select a mentor. Every assignment that you go to, right? It's like, hey, make sure you find a mentor. Why? Because that shortens the learning curve, and then it also adds to what you learned at your previous assignment.
I think it's quite interesting, because even if you can't find a mentor, you can find a role model, someone to model from.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, depending on how transparent you want to be as a leader, the role model can eventually turn into the mentor, because it goes back to what you said earlier. What do you want to get out of this relationship?
Yeah, I certainly, when I'm working with leaders, I do talk about the need to recognize that they're a role model.
Absolutely.
But they're not just a role model at work, they're a role model everywhere. They're role modeling how to be a mum, a dad, a partner, all sorts of things. Because people are always aware of what you're doing and the impact that you're having.
That is so true. One of my better memories in the military was early on when I was not married. And it's kind of a tradition here during the holidays. If you were a single military person, a lot of the married supervisors would invite you over on the holidays. And it's such a great informal tradition that happens. And it goes back to what you just said, Judith. For some people, when they join the military, they may not have had dual parents, right? Maybe they were raised in a single parent home, or maybe they were raised in dual parents, but they didn't witness a healthy marriage. A lot of times when those senior leaders would invite you over on the weekends, and it goes back to your point, you get to see what a father looks like. You get to see what a husband looks like in a different role than maybe what you grew up with. And even if you did grow up in a healthy marriage, then you see now I see what a healthy marriage looks like in a military environment, because all those different factors play into the family dynamics. And to see somebody able to maneuver through those situations in a very clever way allows you to say, I want to add that to my toolkit.
Yeah. Also, I think you learn what not to do. I remember being young and having the most terrible boss and not at all being happy about it. And I realised, I read this, I can't remember what the book was called. The book was called something like What to Do When You've Got a Bad Manager or something like that. And because it's so many years ago, but I remember reading it and it was saying, look at the other person and take it down as lessons for what you won't do. And I used to, so whilst I was looking for a job, I was analysing him and actually taking notes and going, right, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. So it was really good. So it also made work so much more fun. So yes. I was no longer upset about it because I was like, wow, look what I'm learning. I'm learning how to manage. Do you know what I mean? Because I was going, right, you don't talk to people like that. So it was really useful learning.
That is a very important skill. And I do a lot of leadership coaching. And unfortunately, sometimes that topic does come up. And people always ask me, like, how do you maneuver through those challenging professional relationships? And I just tell them the thing that's worked for me over the years in the military and even outside the military is I still treat people the way I want to be treated, whether you believe they deserve it or not. And another secret weapon that I used to do, people thought was crazy, but to this day it still works, is even with that difficult boss or supervisor, I would look at it as, maybe they weren't taught, maybe something happened in their life that never was fixed. So there's an internal hurt, because people don't realize, Judith, hurt people hurt people. So instead of me being one of those that would jump on the boss and talk about them behind their back, I would be the one person that says, hey, what's going on today? What do you mean what's going on? That's none of your business. Hey, not a problem. Just want to let you know if you want to talk, I'm around. And I would cater to the person more versus try to stay away from them. And eventually I would win them over with my personality of, hey, I really do care about you as the leader. You're in charge of us. Here's the task that you put out. I know we have a meeting coming up. Here's some of the things that Judith came up with when we were just talking. You might want to talk to Judith when we open up that meeting instead of, telling everybody what to do. You may get some gems out of there, because the good news is all of success is going to still come and point to you. So why not try to get as much success as possible?
Yeah, I think that is a good strategy, but I think it only works when you've reached a level of seniority where that's acceptable. So, if it was two employees, fine. If you've got an employee and a manager, unless you are sociably friends, that's possible if they're your manager. But if you then got like a senior manager and a junior manager, then there's an issue, unless there's like a positional thing that might give you I've worked in situations where I've been head of HR and there's a director that's a problem, but I have dealt with it because I'm in HR kind of opens up the door to have that, come on, John, what's happening? Something happened at home, But I would not have been able to do that if I was the ops head, if you see what I mean. But if I was the HR director talking to the ops director, that would, again, you're peer to peer. So I think sometimes it depends on where you are, what's the gap between the two roles when you're having that conversation. Because sometimes really junior members of staff, say that you've come into work for the first time, or you're the first time you become manager or something, don't realise there's an unspoken, for some people, I'll be cool with it, but there's an unspoken hierarchy, isn't it? And they'll be like, why are you asking me this?
That is true. So a lot of it comes down to, from what I've had, my experience is the technique and the approach. Like one thing when I coach a lot of leaders now, I talk to them about leadership up. And like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, so many times we go into, especially most situations, we always look at leadership down. But what if you have the personal power within your own self to provide leadership up? Like if you had that leader's attention, if you had that platform, what would you say that will help move the company forward, that would help accomplish the mission? Because a lot of times when you have a leadership up approach, you're more confident, and then they see your confidence, right? And those individuals get recognized different than other situations, because it's like, I never would have went to Darrell about that, but it's just something about the way he conversates, about the way that everything he says is always about the team. It's never personal. After a while, and it takes practice and it takes discipline, but when you make that a part of your true leadership DNA, every place I've gone to, every group that I've worked with, it always comes out.
Yeah, I think it really does, because people need to see you in the wholeness of who you are, as opposed to, so if you have, let's say, you're known for having integrity, you're a confidential person, and all that. It's easier to open up to somebody who's just turned up and gone, "Hey, right, boss, how you doing?" I remember an intervention that my team made many years ago when I used to work in corporates, where unfortunately I had a friend that had committed suicide on the Sunday and I'd come to work on the Monday. Yeah, I kind of came to work, like in that stunned, you don't really know what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? Sure. So like you say, you just rely on routine, and you say, get up, go to, because I found that late in the afternoon. And obviously there was something wasn't right, and they were like, you're right, boss. And I was like, no, this is what happened. And they were constantly saying, you need to go home. And I was like, no, I've got this, got to do this stuff. And because of the relationship I had with them, and they went to one of my peers that we regularly got on well with, and spoke to him, who then took me aside and said, you are going home. I don't want to hear anything. Our management department, go. And I was like, oh, all right then. Do you know what I mean? Because I was like, but the fact that they knew, one, the right peer to go and speak to, but also that I wouldn't be annoyed. I saw it for what it was, which was a loving act between a group of people, because they had no authority to make me leave. And it was the right thing to do, because I was a mess. I was literally just a walking robot. But yeah, and I think that would never have happened if you didn't have that kind of trusting relationship with the team.
Exactly. And again, even it says a lot about you, the fact that they even made that constant decision to make sure you were the best you that you could be, and knowing that at that time, for you to be the best you that you could be, you had to remove yourself from that environment. And again, it goes back to, like you said, self-leadership, right? If you were not a good leader in their eyesight, they could care less. If you came in, that's on you. But I believe there was something inside of your leadership that they said, she always takes care of us, or she looks at us in different ways. This is my way of paying it back, because I see something that I believe could help her the way she's helped me.
Yeah, I mean, they were brilliant, because they were like, one of the managers was like, I'll take on that. What's stopping you from going home? Right, I'm doing that. I'm going to get something. And it's like, we've got it. And I was like, still not going home. And it's like, all right, I'm going. And I think sometimes, I think it takes something for people to do that when it's their boss, I think, as well, isn't it? Because traditionally, you might not know what the reaction is going to be, or if someone does that.
That's correct. And that's why I always tell everybody, leadership plays such a great role, and not just you as an individual, but even, again, with the group, because the greater the leadership is in that team, the more they can handle any type of situation, whether it's, worst case that you've mentioned, or even some of the other things that come on the day-to-day, right? When that group is so tight, when that group is so together, again, it's not about self. It's about what's best for all of us. And one thing I always loved in the military, we would always remind everybody, we're only as strong as the weakest link. So if somebody's a weak link that week because of a loss in the family, because of some extenuating circumstance, we have to put our focus on that link for that time period, so we can build that team member back up.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I became head of HR at 24 in an organisation, which was my first management job and my first job in HR, so it was kind of a double whammy. And I worked for this retailer, and the culture in a particular store was terrible. Leadership culture, it was like dog eat dog, nobody cared for anybody. It was just terrible. And the guy in charge was always set everybody up as competition. So he was always going, that department's making more sales, why aren't you not making more sales? That person got less absolutely. Everything was a competition. Everybody kind of isolated them. Everybody just thought about themselves.
Sure.
And then when I went there, I thought, well, yeah, this didn't work. So I started to do things like, they had to each department had to recruit but sometimes if you were really, really busy, you weren't recruiting for your department. So therefore your department's now suffering because you're doing the work. So I was getting like people who weren't as busy to recruit for the other department, which was like unheard of. And then I would tell the other manager, oh, Darrell's done this for you because he sees that you're struggling. And then the other one goes, oh, John says thank you for, sort of like bending the truth a little bit, but kind of doing that. And I remember the guy in charge set up all this internal competition said to me, Jude, and he goes, I hate the fact that all the managers are getting on with each other and they're also collaborating, and there's no, because everything was tense, if you can imagine, because everything was tense all the time. Staff turnover was really high. And he goes, but I can't argue with the fact that the bottom line is we're making more money.
Yeah.
So I was like, and it just made me laugh, because it was like, I hate what you've done because there's no tension now. But I can't be angry with you because the payoff is there. That's how I interpreted that conversation.
Absolutely. And again, Judith, you've proven that message of self-leadership. One person can make a difference. One person can begin a catalyst within a culture. And so many times we sit back and say, well, if Darrell does it, I'll do it. If Judith does it, then maybe I'll do it. And sometimes you just have to do it because it just needs to be done. One of the things I love in the military is it's always about competition. But the great leaders make it a fun competition. It's like we compete, but we compete to win. We don't compete to let the other person down. It's a difference. Yeah,
I like that. You don't compete to destroy.
Absolutely not.
You compete to grow.
Absolutely.
I like that. You know what? You were saying that's a form of self-leadership. Can you talk more about that? Because I never would have thought of that as self-leadership, because I've always thought in my head, you're making me think differently now, that self-leadership is more of a character-driven thing. And then what you said, actually, it's also about output. So I'm curious about
that. It is, because one thing about self-leadership, what people don't realize, if you do it well enough, and if you're doing it for the right reasons, right, it's contagious. It is absolutely contagious. One of the examples, when I was in the military, we have to take the physical fitness tests. Yeah. And I was always priding myself in the beginning on, I knew I couldn't be the fastest, but I wanted to finish in the top 5, right? So I would try to run my 2 miles in 13 minutes. And the first couple of times I would do it, I'd finish the race, and then I'd kind of just sit back and just do nothing, right? Then after a while, I started seeing the people that were struggling because their gift wasn't running, right? So it was like, well, wait a minute, I can sit here and wait for everybody else to finish, or I can go out there and run with other people. As long as you don't touch them, it's okay, right? And then I changed, and it wasn't about self-leadership from me running the fastest 13 first to 2-minute mile. It was self-leadership in who else can I help get across the finish line? And just that one act, all the other faster runners started doing the same thing. So it was like nobody told anybody to do it. It was just, hey, I'm going to go back and pick up some. You're going to go back and pick up some. Why? Because collectively, right, we empowered people. We helped people in their weakest moment, right? We know that everybody's not a great runner, but guess what? It's not about you being a better runner than me. It's about, can you beat your best time from the previous test?
Helping people in their weakest moment. That is such a great definition of what leadership is, isn't it?
I've seen it. It worked. And again, now here's the other thing, Judith. Remember, we traveled, right? So there's a lot of different times when you're on the road. When you're in town, I don't work in Judith's department, and Judith's not in my department. But when we travel, I may come across Judith. So how do you think that made Judith feel when we're on a trip to Spain and we're setting up this communication equipment? And it's like, oh, Darrell, you're on this trip. Man, I still can't thank you enough for helping me with my run. Hey, anything you need extra on this trip, let me know. So now the self-leadership has turned itself into a collaboration piece in a whole different arena because you were not selfish, and now I'm building better bonds. So imagine somebody that never traveled with me before, and they're like, okay, we're on this trip with Darrell. What's he like? Oh, this guy, hey, he is about other people. He is not about self. He's not about trying to be in front. He really wants to make sure that other people succeed. So now, even though I didn't do anything for that person, the word of mouth is getting around about this is how this person leads. This is how this person carries themselves. So now it started becoming an advantage. When I got on a trip, people were like, oh, we got Darrell. We know what this trip is going to be like. Even if it was the most craziest, hardest, difficult trip, their mindset was already in the way of, we know we're going to get through this because of the type of leadership style he has. We just can't wait for him to show us.
Yeah. I think there is something there about being that people can predict your behavior. There's, in the sense that if there's a mistake that's been made, they know that Darrell's not going to lose it and go crazy and blame everybody. So therefore, I'm not going to tell Darrell I've made a mistake. Whereas if they go, yes, you may be angry, however, you're not going to fire somebody or, cause them a problem till you're going to get the problem solved. It means that people are more eager to support and be there for you.
Judith, that is so true. And you can imagine, right, in our agency, we have a high pressure job, right? Every trip, it's like no failures. It has to be as close to perfect as possible. So I remember sometimes I would try to mitigate or get in front of those situations. So in the beginning of the trip, when I'm talking with my leads, I would ask them, hey, who has, a junior person on here, that may not be, really that experienced, or maybe somebody that made a mistake in a previous trip. I'm like, I would actively look for that. And then they would say, oh, well, I got Darrell here. Yeah, he really made a mistake on his last trip. So now we don't give him that much responsibility. Right. So I said, okay, so what can we do to help Darrell? Right. Can we get him to teach a class this week on that particular topic? And they would say, well, I just told you that they made a mistake in that. Why would you want them to teach other people?
Because they've learned not to do it.
Exactly. But also, Judith, not as further not to do it, but to restore that person's confidence.
Yeah.
Because I always told them, it's not about this trip right now. It's about 5 or 6 trips down the road. We have to make sure that everybody can be the best version of themselves. And leadership is not just my current trip. I want to be the leader that instills that person's confidence. So when they go to the next trip, guess what I'm going to do, Judith? I'm going to call Maurice and say, hey, Maurice, I want you to know that Joe's going to be on your trip. And on my last trip, he taught this excellent class to our satellite people. Not sure how busy you guys are going to be, but if you can get him to teach that class again, I think you'll get a lot of benefit out of it. So now I'm taking it to the next level, that person's going on the trip, never met Maurice before, but when he meets Maurice, Maurice is going to say, oh, hey, I heard about what you did on that last trip and that training that you did. Darrell highly recommended that you give that training here. Can you do that for us? Judith, do you know what that did for that person's confidence?
You know what? It's also the thing about you have an opportunity to positively or negatively impact on someone's life. I mean, just this morning, I was just being interviewed on lessons on leadership, and one of the questions was, can you think of a pivotal moment in your leadership career? And I go right back to when I was 17 with a particular manager, and it was a very positive experience, but it was the fundamental change between what I was like before to who I am today. And wow. I can, and for me, I've written a book on leadership, and
I saw that.
Oh, did you? And he's the template. Like I mean, obviously not necessarily at the time. I didn't realise that over time I'd been absorbing him, and he was a role model. He's 17. You don't think about things like that. But
right.
But whenever I ever sort of started, training courses and stuff, a lot of what I learned from him which was all osmosis. He didn't actually physically teach me how to lead.
Right.
Came from this one guy, and he fundamentally changed me from being a very brutally honest, blunt individual that if I hurt your feelings, I really wasn't that bothered. I was kind of a little bit bothered, but not really. Kind of, like, oh, that's a bit. Do you know what I mean? Upset. Like, oh, I upset Darrell today. That's sad. Anyway, it's the kind of thing. To somebody who really, really cared and very aware of the power and the weight of my words. Do you know what I mean? And I was saying to the woman that was interviewing, Mary Gregory, who was interviewing me today, was. I wouldn't be where I am today, and I was so lucky that I was 17. I was right at the start of my working life, and I learned how to lead, and someone who kind of turns out he was a socialized maverick as well, but who guided me in such a light way that totally impacted. There are leaders I've trained because of him.
Absolutely. It's funny when you made that comment. The first person I thought about, to me, one of my first missions at the White House Communications Agency, is my biggest mentor. His name is Steve Smith. And like you said, just the way they approach things impacted you. And I know for a fact the leader that I am is because of him. Because we were doing this trip, Judith, and back then, the role that I had, one of the additional roles on the trip was to be the motorcade driver. Right. So for the communications vehicle, I would drive that vehicle in the motorcade. So obviously on game day, it's what we call the day when the president comes in, that was not an issue because we're all in the same line, escorted by, the local police. But the day before, and the morning of, you still have to get to the airport, and every city is different, right, Judith?
Yeah.
So my job was, okay, I'm going to make sure, right, that I know how to get to the airport. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do what we call a recon, right? I'm going to go drive this route. I'm going to do it 3 times to make sure that when it's time to get to this airport.
Yeah, because you can't get lost, can you, really?
No, it's like we got to get there so they can set up for the motorcade.
Yeah.
Judith, how about, I never forget this, and we're driving. And this particular route had what we call loops, right? It was 3 loops. And depending on where you came out of that loop, you would totally be lost. And I did that thing, Judith, the right way 3 different times. But how about the morning of? I came out of the wrong part of the loop. Now, this is like, hour and a half, 2 hours before the president's going to arrive. We got to get this car in the motorcade. And I'm at this moment, and Steve's, he's talking to me, trying to, ask about, what's your background, where you from, why'd you join the military? And Judith, while he's saying that, I'm listening to him, but at the same time, I'm like, so do I tell him that I'm lost? Or do I try to figure it out? And I'm telling you, it was a pivotal moment in my career because I'm like, golly, I'm a young person here in the agency, one of my first trips. It was like, man, what I do here, I don't know what it's going to do for my career. I said, so let me just go on the side of integrity. And I go, hey, sir. He said, yeah, go ahead. I said, I hate to tell you this, but I'm lost. And I felt so small, Judith. I was like, sir, I said, sir, I drove this route 3 times yesterday. I promise I did. And I knew that one of those loops was going to get me. And that's why I tried to avoid it and mitigate the situation. But I took the wrong turn. And Judith, I didn't know how he was going to react, right? Didn't know what he's going to say. He goes, oh, don't worry about it. Hang on for a second. He said, pull over right there. I mean, we're in the middle, I think this is in Florida. And we pull over in Miami, and he gets out of the car, and he just goes to this stranger. And I'm like, this is like a high leader in the agency, right? He talks to the stranger. He gets back in the car. He goes, hey, he told us there's a back way to the airport, so let's take this route. And so now we're driving this whole route that I don't know. And now my leader's phone is blowing up. It's like, where are you? They're setting up the motorcade. They're getting ready. And he's like, calm down. He said, get your car ready just in case mine doesn't get there in time. What do you mean get your car ready? He's like, I can't explain it right now. So we eventually get to the airport through the back way, almost minutes before the plane arrives. But here's the pivotal moment, Judith. When we get there, this airport communication officer goes, what happened? Why are you so late? And he says, which was true, we got lost. However, Darrell still found a way to get us here. He didn't tell them that I was the reason we got lost. He just said, we got lost, but Darrell is the reason we got here. And that airport officer was like, isn't this one of your first trips? I was like, yes. He's like, good job. When me and Steve talked later, I had, pulled to the side and said, Steve, first of all, thank you for not, telling what really happened. He's like, no, that's what happened. That was just my version of what happened. I said, but why didn't you tell him, the truth? He said, I told him my version of the truth. He said, because here's the reason. He said, I want you to learn this lesson. Sometimes people think of you based on one critical moment, right? And they try to use that moment to define you. He said, I did not want you to start in this agency with that being the MO about you moving forward. He said, so when somebody hears your name, now they're going to hear, hey, here's a guy that Steve Smith said found a way to get to the airport after being lost. He said, that's the narrative. And then he told me, Judith, he said, now I expect you, as you become a leader in this agency, to make sure that in people's worst times, in their worst mistakes, that you still find a way to make them feel positive and let them know that that is not a career-defining moment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a good place to end, actually.
Sure.
But I think that we all have career-defining moments. I think they need to be good ones. And as you said, even through adversity, I mean, you kept your head, you trusted your leader, and you got to where you need to go. And I just think that's, I think that's a lesson for us all.
Absolutely.
So, Darrell, would you come back again?
Anytime. I love talking about leadership.
Me too. Brilliant. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Darrell as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. To find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you.
Are you interested in Maverick leadership but unsure how to apply it? We can help. Judith Germain has collaborated with David Chislett to produce a 12-part video series on Maverick leadership and how to apply it to your creative thinking skills. This will truly get you thinking and putting into action your ability to innovate and execute, truly changing your outcomes. Check out the show notes for the link or contact us on judith@maverickparadox.com for more information. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.